All right, in the last video we talked about Napoleon losing Haiti, the only successful slave revolt. The Haitian people gained freedom, and then eventually that led to the Louisiana Purchase. Now we're going to talk about basically all of the rest of Latin America, mainly the Spanish and the Portuguese. So South and Central America, we talked about this before, used to be colonies of Spain and Portugal. However, Napoleon defeated both those countries. And that's important, because remember, when Spain had revolutions, Tupac Amaru, when they started to have people rising up in different places, they put it down with strict force. Well, now it's going to be a lot harder for them to do that because their armies are gone or fighting against Napoleon and then losing against Napoleon. The Portuguese are going to hold out, but basically, Spain and Portugal are going to be wrapped up with Napoleon. And so, because they're so wrapped up with that, it's going to give a huge opening for the countries of Latin America. With the cat's away, the mice will play, that sort of idea. In this case, the cat's getting killed by Napoleon. So, colonies had largely white leadership, and they're going to start to break away, and it's going to be largely led by the Creoles. Peninsulares would either go back to Europe or join with the revolutionaries, but it's going to see largely white leadership of the white slave-owning class in Latin America are going to decide to break away politically from Spain and Portugal, start ruling themselves, and they're going to try to maintain the traditional way of life, their traditional colonial style of leadership. Their revolution, in many ways, is more similar to the American Revolution. We're fighting against a power on the other side of the world. We're fighting for European Enlightenment values. They're not trying to change the slave system. They're not trying to change anything socially or culturally, very much like the American Revolution was. They're not trying to change anything. They're just trying to make a political break. They're trying to say we don't need anybody on the other side of the world anymore. We can do it all over here. So very little change from European rule. Like I said, very similar to the American Revolution in many ways. Less successful. All right, so Mexican independence. Napoleon's invasion of Spain weakens the royal authority. One of the first places we see break away is Mexico. And yeah, if you look at this map, Mexico's huge, right? It's going to splinter off over time later on. The Mexican-American War, they're going to lose all this to America. But Mexico was huge. Mexico was a gigantic territory. Priest Miguel de Hidalgo, which I think I'm pretty close to pronouncing correctly, leads a revolution, basically trying to rally the enslaved people, the mestizo people, and the Creoles against Mexican rule and against the abuses that he sees the Spanish rule, the Spanish are doing to the Mexican people. He leads a revolution. He is captured and executed. If you ever sentence a priest who's fighting for people's rights and stuff, you ever sentence a priest to firing squad death, you have to question your what side you're on, I guess, good or bad. But anyways, he's captured and executed in a pretty horrific way. But the rebellion will continue. I'm probably killing a priest who was leading people makes him a martyr for the cause. Today there are statues of Hidalgo in Mexico. So anyways, Hidalgo leads the revolution, even though he is like Toussaint Louverture. A lot of these people have bad ends. He is captured and killed. The revolution continues, and eventually Mexico will become an independent territory. Spain just can't hold on to this vast territory anymore while they're also wrapped up in Napoleon. There will be a short-lived Creole emperor. We don't need to talk about him. And it will become a republic. Yay, like the United States of America is a republic. Well, sorta. Mexico is going to have a very bumpy next 100 years, and even further from that. Stability, political stability is incredibly important, and Mexico is going to lack that. There's a lot of reasons for why, and we'll talk about some of them later. But the Mexican Republic is going to go through several revolutions and have a lot of trouble. All right, and we'll talk about it at the end of this chapter. Southern regions form a federation. We don't need to talk that much about these places right yet. Those more 20th century, we'll talk more about them and U.S. involvement and those sort of things. But we see the southern parts of it start to form their own confederation. Moving on now to South America. So South America, big area, big country, about the entire size of Western Europe altogether. So we're talking about a large territory, jungles, mountains, pretty big territory, hard thing to control, hard to conquer. So Spain, Portugal own different chunks. We start to see independence movements. One of the most famous leaders is Simón Bolívar. Of course, once again, there were tons of other people involved. We're just hitting like the main points here because otherwise this class would go on forever. So Simón Bolívar is going to lead independence movements in South America, especially the northern parts of South America. He's a native of Caracas, which is today Venezuela, and he was influenced by Enlightenment ideals, just like the French Revolution, just like the American Revolution, but also George Washington. Many people will call him the Latin American George Washington, South American George Washington. He's a very prominent figure. Obviously, like Bolivia gets its name from him. Venezuela, I don't know if they still use this right now, but Venezuela's currency is the bolivar. He's an incredibly important figure in Latin American history, especially South American history. He's Creole, which remember means he's white, but he was born in Latin America. He had very close relations. He grew up around Native people and African people, and he was not afraid to bring a lot of these people into his military, and had a much more racially encompassing worldview. Not perfect, okay, but better than a lot of people in his time period. Um, so, anyways, he rises up, and his dream is to create a united Latin America. All of the Spanish colonies, all of these different areas of Latin America should all be connected, and there should be a united South America and eventually a united Central America as well too, kind of like the United States. So just like George Washington created a republic where you had a federation of different states combined into it, not George Washington by himself either, but obviously together. He wanted that for South America, where we have all these different regions, like Venezuela, Bolivia, but they would all come together under the United States of Latin America. Rebels against Spanish rule. He will eventually be forced into hiding, though. He dies in hiding from pneumonia, but whatever, that's depressing. We'll move on to that. Anyways, forms alliances with many different Creole leaders. Finally, Spanish rule will be finally wiped out in South America by 1825. Even though I'm pretty sure he was dead by then. Okay, so we talked about this before. Gran Colombia. Bolivar hoped to form a U.S.-style federation. Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, they all formed what he called back then Gran Colombia. This was the start of it. Grand, like big, Colombia. So that's his start. He's trying to basically set up the United States of Latin America here. He tries to bring other countries in, largely fails. By the way, this guy's dead as well now too. Hugo Chavez here, dressing this way, obviously trying to look like Simon Bolivar. All right. Moving on. Why did it fail? Why is there no United States of Latin America? So, strong political differences. Gran Colombia, he was trying to push and say, well, we're all the same and we should focus more on our similarities. And that, yes, there are cultural differences between these different regions of Latin America, but it's all actually the same. It's not. We struggled with problems in this country, right, between the North and the South, and different regional disputes. Latin America is going to be the exact same thing. South America is going to be the exact same thing. And so while he tried to say we should set aside our differences, the differences were too huge. Also, geography is going to be a huge player to try to make an area that's very jungly and mountainy united, where it was hard to, this is before trains, this is before planes and steamships and stuff. To unite that whole area is a lot different than trying to unite colonies that had existed for hundreds of years and had a strong infrastructure on the eastern coast of the United States of America. That's one thing. He's going to really struggle to try to unite all these areas. And so there is no Latin United States of America, or like Latin United States of Latin America. And it was a nice idea, but it's not going to work out. All right, and this one's silly, but last European rule we didn't really need to talk about here for Latin America. So Brazil's going to go a different way from the Spanish colonies and how they broke away. So Napoleon's invasion into Spain and Portugal pushed the Portuguese royal family out. You got to think about it too. Portugal's a relatively small country in Europe. They're almost like already in the Atlantic Ocean. And when Napoleon comes knocking, the royal family leave rather than fall prey to Napoleon and maybe get conquered and held as political prisoners or something. They flee and they run to Brazil, which is this massive colony on the other side of the world. And so they move to Rio de Janeiro. So for a little while, Brazil sort of is Portugal. Like Portugal just kind of moves to Brazil for a little while. So after Napoleon's gone and Europeans are doing the Congress of Vienna and they're trying to talk about what to do, with aftermath of Europe, the royal family of Portugal, they go back to Portugal because now Napoleon's gone. It's safe for them to return. They get their borders again. Yay, peace in Europe. They leave behind their son Pedro, and he's supposed to be the regent. He's basically in charge of Brazil and trying to basically being the owner of Brazil for the royal family. So the Portuguese royal family goes back. They leave their son behind and they say no parties, right? So exactly what does Pedro do? throw a giant party in. But in this case, he basically overthrows his parents. He makes an agreement with the Creoles, the white people who owned most of the land and owned all the wealth in Brazil. And he makes an agreement and says, "Hey, how about we all become our own country?" And Brazil is born. Brazil is born largely out of Napoleon conquering Portugal and then leaving their son behind. That was maybe a mistake for Portugal. So Portugal is going to lose Brazil in this case to their son, and Brazil gets an emperor. So the Emperor Pedro I, Emperor of Brazil. At one point, he was offered actually to return to Portugal and become the king. He turns it down. Once again, Brazil is massive, incredibly wealthy, a large amount of sugar. They had gold mines. I mean, I can't blame them, but it's sort of a silly way for it to go. Brazil's history is going to be a little bumpy as well too. A lot of these places, I keep saying that, but Brazil is a European-style empire in the New World. They are going to be the last country, I'm pretty sure, I'd have to fact check this, but they're going to be the last country in the Western Hemisphere to ban slavery. A big part of that has to do with their history. They are a European wealth-extracting empire that has just now moved into the New World. Their social structures are going to remain largely intact. Even after the American Civil War, they still had slavery. And so Brazilian history, we'll talk about that more later in the 20th century. But right now, this is basically what the world looks like, or the Western Hemisphere looks like. The United States of America has grown massively. England still claimed parts of this Oregon territory. We don't talk about that in this class. That's more of a AP West thing. But Mexico, the Mexican territory, breaks away from Spain. We'll talk more about the struggles and bumps they're going to deal with there. Down here, Spain loses all of these colonies. There was an attempt, right? Grand Colombia would have been all up here. There was an attempt to bring in all of these places and even include in these places. That unfortunately fails for them. Simon Bolivar fails over there. Brazil becomes the Empire of Brazil. Portugal moves here, then moves back. And of course Haiti, the French lose Haiti. And now Latin America is largely free of Europeans. A few exceptions. The Falkland Islands are still owned by England. But a few exceptions over here and stuff. Cuba is still owned by Spain. But for the most part, the grand majority of Latin America is now independent.